Hey guys, are you looking for a sportsbook that you can trust? Well, look no further than mybookie.ag, where you can get a 50% match on your initial deposit of up to $1,000 when you use promo code DFSARMY. As a bonus, when you use promo code DFSARMY, you also get a free month of DFS Army VIP and DFS Army Beat the Bookie membership. That's a $100 combined value. So we'll help you with your daily fantasy sports and we'll help you with your handicapping. Free when you sign up for mybookie.ag using promo code DFSARMY.
In 2015, an elite DFS Army Commando unit formed to bring high-level DFS strategy to the masses. Today, hated by DFS sharks and lineup sellers alike, they continue their quest to turn Joe into DFS pros.
Alright, welcome back to another episode of Tacos Fast 40, presented to you by DFSArmy.com. This week we are headed to Las Vegas, out in the desert for another 1.5 mile track, but it's not going to be anything like last week. I'll get into the breakdown of the track here in just a second. First, I got to remind you, use the link in the description. If you like what you hear on this podcast, go to DFSArmy.com. And you can use promo code TACO to get yourself a lifetime 20% off discount. We cover all things fantasy racing for DraftKings and FanDuel, the Truck Series, the Xfinity Series, and of course the Cup Series. And we have a research station that breaks down all the different stats that you could need. And I'll be referencing that throughout the pod. And the Domination Station lineup optimizer for all three NASCAR series, Trucks Xfinity, and Cup Series, along with premium access to all of the other daily fantasy sports going on. Basketball, baseball's around the corner, golf's in full swing, no pun intended, and got a good MMA crew too. I got that big UFC event coming around the corner. So again, you'll want to come check us out, dfsarmy.com. and use promo code TACO on sign up to help support the pod and get you a 20% off discount. So let's talk about the track here, Las Vegas Motor Speedway. This is where they had some pretty big tests as far as this new race package goes. And this will also be the first time that we see the aero ducts come into play. Last week, we were at a 1.5 mile track in Atlanta. This week we're at another 1.5 mile track, but it couldn't be any less similar. Atlanta had the really old surface, and Las Vegas has a newer surface and less banking as well. 24-degree banking in Atlanta compared to 20-degree banking here, but a lot more grip, and the race just isn't based on handling as much as Atlanta was. Atlanta was all handling with the lack of grip and the tire fall off. You won't see the tires fall off quite as much here. We saw in the truck race already. Some people chose to go 2 tires, no tires, instead of going with 4 tires. That was something you would never see happen in Atlanta. And in certain spots, you can see that happening in Las Vegas. It's really a track where a track position is going to be huge. And if we see some pack racing in here, I've heard teams, are definitely planning for, and again, like I've said, they've already tested things out here. And, just to let you know, what all went on in those tests. So I was watching, it was Busch. It was Kyle Busch, talk about the track a little bit. And, he said when they ran the test out here, they did it in 12 car packs. And he said they ran a 25 lap race run. And by lap 8, it was spread out. And, we're going to see teams possibly, some teams more than others, draft. We saw that in qualifying. We saw Hendricks do that. RCR is going to be kind of center stage this week. It seems like they're the team that has improved the most with this package. We'll have to see how things shape out in second practice. We've had one practice so far. The Friday practice, usually this half of the season, the half the FS1 Fox covers. Usually we have the qualifying on Friday night, and then there's a practice on Friday, but they're all in qualifying trim. That was the case today, so you can pretty much scrap that. I think only one person took over 10 laps, and it was Joey Gaze. So if you want to factor in that Joey Gaze was number 1 in 10 lap speeds on at this track, and go for it. But he was the slowest of any car out there. We care a lot more about practice 2 and 3, and we'll definitely update you guys on the site. Update our thoughts once those practices come out. Update the projections as well. I wouldn't mess with the domination station quite yet until we get those practices in. You never know what could happen. We could have guys go to backup cars, go to the back, or you could have some guys report problems. There's some teams like Penske that doesn't really know what all they're doing so far and doesn't really have a plan set up. The drafting wasn't working out for them. I was listening to Keselowski talk about the race here, and he really stressed that the cars don't like having anything to their right, and it causes guys to go to the outside a little bit more often than they would. Usually want to focus on the inside lane. Usually it's a little bit faster just because it's technically a little bit less track you have to run. It's a shorter distance. This is a track that it's not a full. It didn't have the full-on banking like Atlanta with the 24 degrees, where the outside lane had enough banking to kind of give you a lane to run in. Here we usually see people kind of go towards the inner lane here, but we will see more people venture to the outside, as you really don't want cars getting into your right-hand side. It will cause you to get loose. It could cause a little bit more carnage. This track historically has been really, really safe. It ranks second out of the 23 tracks in percentage of race run under caution, 10.5%. The second lowest number besides Dover, and also the second highest average green flag run percentage. That's basically, you can see this on the track comparison section of the research station, but it's what percentage of the race each run is on average. So in one given run, you'll run about 15% of the race, 14.9% to be exact, and that's right behind Sonoma Raceway, where the green flags there run about 15% of the entire race in each run. So expect a lot of long green flags usually. It can be a bit of a lap turner. I know that Atlanta was sort of the same way, but things are going to be quite different than Atlanta. It's a lot easier to pass the leader here. The pole sitter hasn't done all that well recently. Of course, we've had guys start on the front row, like starting second, and dominate that way. And we have seen some huge points scored from guys. We just saw Kyle Busch just destroy the truck race and lead pretty much everything. And you had to have him even at $15,500. Back in 2015, Kevin Harvick led 142 laps with 79 fast laps for 138 points on DraftKings, and he did it again last year in this spring race, 214 lead laps. This was part of that stretch where Harvick was just winning everything right off the bat after Daytona, and it looked like he couldn't be stopped, but he actually had a perfect driver rating in that race. We've also seen Martin Truex Jr. the year before. He started second and won with 150 lead laps, 60 fast laps. The only other 100 plus DraftKings scorer that we've seen since 2013 is back in. No, it was just this last race, Martin Truex Jr. In the fall, the new fall race that they added, which we're gonna factor in a little bit less than this race here. The usual spring race, just because the track was a lot warmer a lot less grip. Some drivers, I think Keselowski noted that it's a completely different sort of race than that spring race, and that actually had a few more laps just due to some playoffs there, but it didn't race exactly the same. Of course, it's going to race completely different with the new package, and that's something that we're going to be anticipating. Should just add more variance into the mix, and was able to find some odds that are really interesting. There was one that was just a prop. I'd probably bet against this or bet the under, but it was really intriguing that there's like an over-under prop bet that you can make, and it was like 110 each way, so it was pretty much what they had figured for the total number of different leaders, and they had it at 11.5. So Vegas is literally from Vegas. Their sportsbook expects over 10 people to lead, and that's pretty remarkable. I mean, I would bet against that, but it's going to race a lot differently than we've seen here in the past with these, guys leading over 150 laps, 100 laps. It's still possible because I think the way Keselowski is breaking it down started to make a lot of sense. If you're out in the front, that is where you want to be. You want to be out in the very front and just stay there, because once you start falling back, it's impossible to kind of get back. You'll start falling backwards, and it's really hard to pass the leader, the guys up in the very, very, very front, the fast cars. And this is something that we have seen at other tracks. It's just once you go back farther, the randomness and variance should just be a little more wild than your usual race. And first place kind of I don't think they'll get as many fast laps this year, just because usually guys drafting, or it's expected maybe that, I don't know, I can't say usually yet, we haven't even had this race yet, but it's expected that the guys drafting will get some fast laps. We kind of saw that in the truck race, and that's a completely different sort of drafting, with the aerodynamics of the boxy truck and all, but we will see the drafting come into play. Some of the Chevy seemed to be on board with that. During qualifying, we saw guys trying to hustle and find some teammates to work with because they had that crazy open qualifying that, Ryan Blaney was especially not a fan of. Made himself known that really sucked for him. And we're going to see different teams just doing different things. I know that we've got a lot of questions for Penske. They seem slow, but they do this a lot in practice where they look slow all as a group and then they all go out there and crush. And this is a place where all the Penske drivers have finished in the top 7 over the last 4 races. So, while we're looking at historical trends, we're going to want to factor in the changes, the reduction in horsepower. This race averages about 138 miles per hour in average speed. And we should see a drop there. We saw a drop in lap times for about 2 seconds or so, about 10 miles per hour, around there. And not really sure how drafting, especially when a lot of people are drafting, will affect things. And it's just something we don't have much of a precedent for. We're setting the precedent right now. Luckily, I'm still recording every race, every lap. Been going good so far. It's really helped with the practice times. You'll see on the practice times this week that we have the top 5, 10, 15, 20 lap averages recorded as necessary. We'll probably bump that up to like 30 or so once we get to like the small tracks. But that's something I'm really excited for here. It really helps break down the race. I learned that in the truck race, even though Kyle Busch completely dominated the whole thing, he didn't have any of the 3 fastest laps, which was kind of surprising. You'd figure that, the way it was before, if you just had a car out there early on in clean air, you're going to pretty much put up a faster lap than anyone. But, again, trucks are completely different than cars. We'll be focusing on cars in this podcast, but, or the stock cars, but, we really don't have much to look at as far as a precedent here. Last week, it's hard to compare last week to this week. We can really look more at the playoff race, or at the playoff race, the All-Star race in Charlotte last year. Of course, it was kind of an exhibition setting, but, that was them testing out the package, and we saw, constant lead changes and crashes, a little bit of carnage. So, expect a completely different type of race than you're used to. A lot of drivers and analysts alluded last week that, at Atlanta is Atlanta, and it's going to kind of race more or less the same. I think it was Waltrip that said that it doesn't matter what kind of stock car you throw at Atlanta, everyone's going to kind of race it the same. But here, a lot of drivers, I know David Ragan last week had said that at Las Vegas we'll get to see, the real sort of debut of this package and what it's all about, because if any of the tracks that they were adding this package to, Las Vegas would be the one where we see, the pack racing and the more similar race to Charlotte. Of course, you could say the same about Charlotte, but it's the only reason we're really looking at that Charlotte All-Star race is because it's the only real precedent that we have, and it's weird. It had several little stages, lots of mandatory pits to show off the pit crews and all that, and the huge prize to first with pretty much nothing else mattering. So of course the guys are going to drive it a little differently than usual, not just be happy with stage points coming second, third, or fourth. Exhibition races, they tend to go all out, sort of like the Clash in Daytona, pretty similar there. But you had the lap 3 accident with Kurt Busch, and then lap 57 it was in stage 3 already. They had some pretty quick stages. I think it was 4 stages in this little race, but in stage 3 looks like it was Kane and Bowman had a wreck that caused Bowman to have another wreck about 17 laps later. And then, there was kind of a big one, lap 76, with 4 to go. Looks like about 8 people crashed there in turn 4. And then they had another crash, just a 2-person crash, a few laps before the end of the race. So, compare that to this being generally about the second or third safest track on the circuit, just compared to all the other tracks. It should change things up significantly. We didn't see a lot of these changes last year, but again, this is a whole new monster. It's really going to set the precedent for what's going forward, and we're going to look to this race in detail when judging 1.5 mile tracks coming up. But I think we've got a little break from those. Get some shorter tracks like Martinsville and Phoenix coming up soon, and that'll just be standard racing. We can go off of historical data just fine. But anyway, just historically here, this has actually been one of the worst tracks as far as the average percentage of fantasy points allotted to the guys starting 30th or worse. Again, it's a track position sort of track. If you go to the historical summary for both DraftKings and FanDuel, this is one of the coolest parts of the research station. One of the first things that I reference. It really does tell you a lot. It'll tell you how guys do, either based on their starting positions or their season average driver rating coming in. So pretty much the different tiers of drivers. The 110 plus guys are going to be your Kyle Busches, your Kevin Harvicks, and your Martin Truexes, the big 3. And those guys have crushed on DraftKings for just a hair over 69 fantasy points each, averaging about 7th place finish, 81 lead laps, 37 fast laps. This is a track that is very good to the best of the best, except for in the fall race, Kevin Harvick. He ended up having an early issue and finished about last. Again, that can happen to anyone. You saw the truck race today. Pretty much all of the highest owned guys got into some major trouble, and with the variance being cranked up from a usual event, you're going to care more about getting off of the chalky plays and getting myself onto some other plays. We saw some really good performances from some guys that had excruciatingly low ownership in trucks. Of course, a lot of that is just because of the quick turnaround. And, you've got people trusting optimizers a lot more and just plugging in the chalky, easy place differential plays. And that allows for some guys to get forgotten. It still happens in the Cup Series. It's just, it's not going to be quite as drastic. We're going to want to focus on, what is going to put us in the best sort of leverage spot just with all this added variance. And usually that just lends itself to playing more place differential, at least on DraftKings. But this is a track that, more than other tracks, position is key. Track position, there'll be different guys that I like just because I know they're good at finding themselves track position and just staying there. Guys like a Keselowski, especially when he has nothing to lose with the playoff spot already locked in. I had said, right in the middle of the race last week, I was like, this just feels like a race where Keselowski wins because he was really low owned. And everyone had pretty much forgotten him, and he had the flu, and he was on his Michael Jordan secret stuff right there. But with that win, but those are going to be the key plays that we need to kind of find. Maybe just think about guys that most people will overlook. Maybe you've got some guys like it's kind of early to tell, but the RCR guys maybe. People would be used to fading them starting so high, but who knows with the with the change in package, it should equalize the field a bit more and keep guys from being, the fades that we thought they might have been. But, a lot of that's going to, be affected by practice tomorrow. But for right now, we can go through the field, just give a good idea of, how I feel about the different drivers based on where they're starting at right now. But first I wanted to touch on FanDuel here because I'd given the DraftKings breakdown. In FanDuel, well, actually, let me go back to the DraftKings breakdown. I had mentioned the averages by season average driver rating. I kind of wanted to explain the averages by starting position. So it's looking at guys based on if they started 1st through 5th, 6th through 10th, etc., going down to 36th through 40th. We saw in Daytona, the guys starting 26th or further back, they averaged about 35 fantasy points to 15 fantasy points for the guys starting in the top 15. Of course, that is kind of flip-flopped here, and we have what I always end up calling just like a dead zone. Each track sort of has one, just a spot where everything looks very linear, but there's just one random spot that is a dead zone. Usually it's either the 6 through 10 or the 11 through 15 slot or 16 through 20. This week it is the 6 through 10 slot, and I think it's just because a lot of the really elite drivers tend to just start top 5 and they just hog fantasy points. But it's interesting that the guys starting 11th through 15th, 16th through 20th, 21st through 25th, they all average more than the guys starting 6th through 10th. Of course, that can be affected by just where certain guys just so happen to start. This isn't a twice-a-year race. This was just a yearly race until this last season. But generally speaking, the farther up you start, the more fantasy points you score on DraftKings. With the guys starting 1st through 5th, they hit 60, or they hit 50 fantasy points 40% of the time, and the second best at that would be the 11th through 15th and the 16th through 20th starting positions that hit it 23% of the time. Other than that, not a lot of people are hitting 50 or more fantasy points. If you look at the very back 10 spots, again, like I had mentioned earlier, this is one of the worst tracks historically for guys starting in the back, and it is important to keep that in mind, just like we saw last week, especially with guys like Ross Chastain that kind of burned a lot of people. The guys in the back are going to get lapped. It's just how it is. They just can't, at any track like 1.5 miles or shorter, you're going to have lap traffic, and almost half of the field is going to get lapped. There's actually another prop for this, and they put the number of drivers on the lead lap at the end of the race at, I think it was 19.5. So half of the field is going to be lapped at the very end of this thing. And you'll see guys like, if you go down to the garbage bin and pick some really crappy guys, like a Corey LaJoie or one of the guys who survived the last race here, because there's a lot of carnage and it caused some back feeders that survived just to finish in like the top 20 or so. If you go back and pick a guy like Corey LaJoie who benefited from that, at this race, they're going to end 3, 4, 5, 6 laps down. Not him necessarily, but, the guys in the back 10, they're just not good. The guys coming here averaging 40 to 50 season average driver rating, which would be, the guys in the very back there, they just tend to do just horribly. 14 fantasy points on average. You're going to want to, at least on DraftKings, there are other plays that just have a lot more upside. Chastain sitting there at the very, very back, so I could understand the case for him. And you're going to play these guys more than you usually would. Usually you would just avoid these guys altogether at a standard Las Vegas race, with how single file it is and how many laps they go back. You can play them a lot more now since some more carnage should be thrown into the mix. But I'd temper my expectations going in still. Like they had said, things could get single file here still. It's just the restarts could be a little tiny bit more plate race like. They had asked Keselowski if it was similar to plate racing, but he said this is a completely different type of race. And he was asked if his plate race acumen would help him at the track, and he said, honestly, not sure if it'll play into the race. So guys, I've heard some people already say that this week is going to be just like Daytona again. It is going to be a lot more like Daytona than your usual standard 1.5 mile race, which is usually about as strict and predictable as it could get, but not by the factor that people think it is going to be. It's just going to matter a little bit more on the restarts, and we're going to see some drafting and stuff come into play that we just usually do not see here at all. But again, a lot of it is just unknown. We're really just kind of waiting and seeing how things go. We're just we're just using predictions right now. But going into the FanDuel scoring here, the scores are more uniform. Of course, the guys starting in the front usually always score more on FanDuel, but the main difference between the sites are, guys starting in the back there will score 32 fantasy points to like 50 some from the guys in the front. As we're on, DraftKings, the guys in the back are scoring 17 compared to like 40 from the guys in the front. Everyone has a lot bigger of a floor with the completed laps here. Something you'll really notice on FanDuel, especially as we go to these short tracks. The completed laps and the fact that there are no fast laps, which on DraftKings are worth double the points of lead laps. For FanDuel, it's really only about the lead laps. So, the guys that are leading the tons and tons of laps, of course, there are going to be more of them this week, so it's a little bit up in the air, but still, as usual, FanDuel is just obviously, you can't have anyone that like crashes early on. That is a lineup killer completely. Even if they're starting last, it doesn't matter. Place differential just isn't going to factor in here as much, but the scores will be more uniform. And they don't even really lend themselves to the guys starting in the very front. They're all pretty even spread throughout the top 20, with just a little bit of advantage going to that very front group of 5. But, on FanDuel, you're looking for guys who will just finish well, more importantly than them getting the place differential. But there are some plays that are far enough back, like, say, a Ryan Newman, where you can get enough place differential to make yourself a good little FanDuel play. It's just a lot less important over there. On DraftKings, again, we're still going to want to jam in as many of the guys from the front as possible, but it just seems like the safe play to make is to pick solid plays that you think will stay on the lead lap somehow, and yet also gain some place differential, have place differential upside. there is potentially huge upside to having guys in the back that can survive a big random sort of crash on a restart or something. Anytime there's more variance, of course, it leads to place differential just being more valued. But, it's kind of a contradiction with this being a track that really, really is not about place differential and is really about finishing and holding on to position. Again, that's just the key. You'll hear it a lot. And we're really just going to want to play the cars that are fast in practice. But, ownership also, it's going to be key this week, is just to fade ownership, fade a lot of the chalk, especially if they don't have much reason for being the chalk, or they have some issues they can get into, especially if they have a chance at getting a lap down or a couple laps down. Those kind of guys, be really wary with them. But there are some guys that are just sitting in really, really good spots, and it'll be kind of hard to avoid them, especially given history here. And we're gonna kind of qualifying was very good to us in Cup. For DraftKings purposes, I'll say that, because we do have some plays that are just solid, that are starting in the back, and they'll be chalky, but they'll probably be who you want to play, just with the concern with a lot of the other guys down here. But we'll go through them as we go down the field here. We're going to go by just DraftKings salary, top to bottom, and starting with your pole sitter, Kevin Harvick. Now, he comes in at a whopping $12,500. Even more whopping $14,500 over there on FanDuel. He's a defending winner of this race, but he's crashed the other 2 times he's tried since 2017 in the fall race here last year. Again, he met his demise earlier, as I had mentioned. In 2017, also, he fell early as a victim. Finished 41st first back in 2014. In the same circumstances, but he won back in 2015. His wins here come in dominating fashion. And I always like scrapping DNFs, even if they happen to people a few times in a row. We saw in the Truck Series, there was sort of a case of poetic justice where Natalie Decker, who had crashed out early in her first 2 races in the Xfinity Series, she ended up being like the second lowest owned driver on the entire board in some GPPs, down 4 or 5% owned. And she actually ended up in the winning lineup in a few GPPs. So DNFs will affect the game logs that people are looking at, using to build their rosters. I have no problem using guys coming off DNFs. I have no problem using Chase Elliott here, who's had a DNF in 3 of 4 tries. I don't really think it's all that apparent that, it's not something that's going to just repetitively happen to a person unless it's like a really severe case. I think it's like Stenhouse at Martinsville or something, where he crashes like every single time there. But even then, there's still merit to playing these guys, and you'll see them just pop off and break these sort of streaks and win. We saw that with Eric Jones at Daytona last year, for example. He crashed and finished last year. This year also rates out for a pretty decent play. DNFs, I throw them out the window. I don't even factor them in to the different splits. A lot of the time, they aren't even your fault. You get ran into. A lot of times, a tire just goes down. It's Goodyear's fault. So, lots of things that can happen. DNF's just good to scrap those, but just be a little bit wary of them, especially on FanDuel. A lot more of a deal on FanDuel. That's where you want to pay attention to the laps finished section of the research station. You can see the percentage of laps finished by guys, lead lap finish percentage, and things like that. So, getting back into it, Kevin Harvick here, he dominates when he doesn't crash. So we can expect him to dominate this race. Right now, Ford is minus 110 favorite to win as a manufacturer. They're really, really thinking that, Kevin Harvick, who's won here a few times in the last few years, has a chance to dominate this race yet again, which is just what he does. And the other Fords also. I know Penske is in a little bit of trouble right now, just with what they're saying in practice and all that, but historically, they have absolutely crushed this track. They have destroyed this track, and the other Stewart-Haas Racing Fords also are looking pretty fast in practice, and especially Boyer there, third in the 5-lap averages. Of course, there's qualifying trim and all that, but they at least, they all rate out pretty decently. But Harvick, of course, is the main reason that number is the way it is. He's the odds-on favorite, just slightly over Kyle Busch right now, but I'm sure that will change when the updated odds are posted tomorrow. You can expect Harvick to dominate this race, and it becomes a matter of being able to afford and pay for him, which I think you easily can do this week. FanDuel might be a little bit harder to, but there are some punts. And the fact that they go all the way down to like 3 and 2K on their guys now, you could possibly take a Chastain in 38th and hope he has some sort of survival chance, like he did last year to finish 20th in that fall race there. Maybe that might work out or something just to get you room for guys like Kevin Harvick. But I think Kyle Busch will have more ownership than Kevin Harvick on FanDuel because he's significantly cheaper. On DraftKings, he is the second most expensive, as he definitely should be in this race. On DraftKings or on FanDuel is the fourth most expensive, and I get that Keselowski has won here 3 out of the last 7 times, and Truex has 4 top 4 finishes in the last 5 times he's raced here. But I mean, come on, it's Kyle Busch. He just absolutely crushed the Truck Series race, and he's going to crush the Xfinity Series race tomorrow. I am pretty certain of that. And then, he's going to be fired up, and he's going to want to come for the sweep. I could just definitely see that happening at his hometown. And, he's starting third. He's right in position to potentially do that. Just Harvick, of course, has a lot of the precedent in his way with double the fast laps and lead laps at 1.5 mile tracks over the last year or so. But yeah, Kevin Harvick's going to be more popular on DraftKings. I think Kyle Busch edges him out a little bit on FanDuel just with the huge price reduction and Harvick's price being so egregious in the first place. But that's where I think it's going to be at for right now. I think on DraftKings, Kyle Busch actually goes really overlooked as it stands right now. It will be it's something that's going to be affected by the Xfinity race. We saw Keselowski get into a lot of trouble at Daytona at the Xfinity race there, and that put a huge hurt on his ownership. And we could see something like that. And I could also see his ownership being ramped up if he posts some good practice times first and foremost, and then if he crushes that Xfinity race as well, I'd expect his ownership and his odds lines to go up a little bit there. Also, we're looking at how the other JGR Toyotas are doing. If those guys also are showing a lot of speeds, they're probably going to work together as a team and find their way up in the front. So always looking at those kind of things. So Kevin Harvick versus Kyle Busch for me. Kevin Harvick on the pole. I mean, it's how many times we see it last year, and that first stage is pretty much guaranteed to all go to Harvick. But that would usually be the case. So I don't know, with this package, we're not going to just slam Harvick as much as before. I do like how he is easily the best at 1.5 mile tracks over the last year. Driver rating of 130, no one else above 110, just ridiculous. 77 lead laps on average, 45 fast laps on average. The only guys holding a candle to him over the last year are Kyle Busch, Martin Truex Jr., and Kyle Larson. But Kyle Larson's only does that at select tracks. Of course, this is one of them. So he's gonna probably be one of the few other dominators starting up top that will really matter. You had a lot of weird guys like Ragan, Hemrick, and Dillon starting up top. I'll get to Dillon. He might possibly be in the mix there. The super fast practice times and winning the test and all that. But he's someone we'll get to. I think that it really comes down to Kevin Harvick versus Kyle Busch. One of them probably leads a good portion of this race. Not as much as they usually would, but they're both really safe to just stay up front all day long. And, you can't really... I guess you could afford them together if you really try to jam it there, but I don't think that'll be necessary at all. Of course, that 11.5 line is just so interesting for the leaders and stuff. And if we see a constant shuffle, could see Kyle Busch or Kevin Harvick being a fade of sorts. I don't think a fade on Kyle Busch is even really worth it that much on DraftKings, where I think his ownership is just going to come in suppressed at 11,900. But and the same goes for Kevin Harvick on FanDuel. Like, I'm still getting some Kevin Harvick on FanDuel for sure, even with Kyle Busch looking like a much better price. Just because I know I can get him with some of the punts I'm targeting. Yeah, I don't know. Kevin Harvick's ownership on DraftKings should come in around 30 to 40%, around there or so. I mean, the stats are just incredible. He does have the crashes recently at this track, but also the wins. Just got done crushing last week. Not as big of a favorite as he usually would be. He'd usually be like a 5-1 or so. Right now he's at 6.5-1. We'll see how that goes tomorrow, but practice times are gonna sway a lot of the ownership. That's still just something we're waiting on. We're also just waiting to see if Harvick has some good long run speeds tomorrow. With the addition of all the different lap averages, it's gonna be nice to see who has some good sustained longer run speeds. So it's gonna be something we're looking to. But right now, it's seeming like it'll be Harvick. Harvick leading a large majority of this race. Well, I don't know about a majority, but more than other drivers, with the chance of him being shuffled out. I've kind of stammered on about these two for a little bit. I guess I'll just shed some light on Kyle Busch, of course. I think he goes under-owned on DraftKings, and I really don't mind taking him for the sweep there. Safest could be on FanDuel. Love him on FanDuel, but he's going to be so much chalk with the price. But no one finishes more. No one finishes on the lead lap more than him. Over the last 2 years, he's finished on the lead lap in every single 1.5 mile track that they've had. It's just the expectation with Busch. He's got the best pit crew. I think that's going to matter a little bit more at this track than others, with position just being so important. You really want a solid pit crew down there. I know Kevin Harvick's gotten over some of the struggles he's had there in the past and has a decent crew with him together, but Kyle Busch's is still pretty clearly the best in NASCAR, and that will help him a lot here and could help him find his way out in front, where if he gets in front, there's probably not a lot of people passing him. He's that kind of driver. So going down a little bit further here, the two big Penske guys, Brad Keselowski, 11,400, ridiculous price on FanDuel, 14,000 there. And I get it. It's just the results here. Top 7 in every race here since 2013, with 3 wins in 2014, 2016, and the most recent fall race here in 2018, when he was just on that tear, winning race after race. That was a chase race as well. So again, look into that race less than the others, but it doesn't matter what race you look at. Keselowski gets it done here, averaging 29 fast laps, 37 lead laps. Again, the average running position of 5.6, only behind Kevin Harvick in that regard. It has a better average finish, of course, but that's just because Kevin Harvick has had some struggles here in the past, but almost a comparable driver rating, just at this track, of course. At 1.5 milers altogether, he has just been, sort of the same class as Logano, his teammate. You'd consider Larson to be around there until the end of the season when he started really doing well at the 1.5s. Ryan Blaney as well, but I have a lot of hopes for Blaney. Just not so much this week. He seems to not really like this place a whole lot, but we'll get to him. Screw it. Well, let's just talk about Penske as a whole here. Logano 10-7 on DraftKings, and he's 13,000 on FanDuel, with Ryan Blaney at $9,500 on DraftKings, and he's coming in at 12,000 on FanDuel. FanDuel has a lot of respect for Penske, probably overweighting some of the recent results with the Keselowski win last week, and of course Daytona being Daytona with Penske and them being the strongest guys. think they're kind of overpriced across the board on both sites. They've gone on record, Keselowski during his interview, he's basically saying that Team Penske is not as fast as the RCR guys right now. And of course, usually every single week, Penske is a lot faster than RCR. But just with how things are right now, the hierarchy in NASCAR has kind of shifted a little bit. Of course, we'll see how the things go with them in practice tomorrow, but they've got the most concern of any team. They've not been able to draft together and all that. Not sure how they'll work with Stewart-Haas, but Stewart-Haas is going to be their only real friend, so, still like to see the, that Ford line, although it's something I would bet against there, with Ford being a favorite to win straight up against the other two competitors combined. But, I think that kind of under values, guys like Hamlin or even Eric Jones could win. Kyle Busch, of course, with Toyota. And the Chevys have just looked really strong all week. So we'll see how that holds up. I know that they released that line on Bovada, usually on race day or the night before. But yeah, Penske as a whole just looking like a concern spot right now. They do start farther back. Logano starting 10th, Keselowski starting 19th, which is pretty decent for place value for him. They'll probably definitely have you get some chairs on Keselowski, especially with how under-owned he was last week. And you've got Blaney starting 13th. Again, these guys have all finished in the top 7 over the last 4 races here. They do find a way to get themselves up there. Keselowski agreed with a reporter that asked if they were going to use his car as somewhat of a guinea pig. Of course, not yet, of course, but in general, if there's anyone that's going to be taking a risk, it's going to be Keselowski. Just trying for different strategies and stuff, which could help and could harm him. Of course, he's going to want to go out there and win and stuff and add more, great finishes here to his collection. He probably will. Starting 19th, he's definitely improving from where he starts. So that does give him some value there. And Logano, I think his ownership on DraftKings is going to be really, really low. I look to him to be very under-owned. Of course, that's just considering right now he's 27th fastest in the practice times, but that'll probably change as we get into tomorrow. And Blaney, I think, will be lower owned, especially with him being vocal about not liking how things are going so far this week. But the track history still will probably get him at least a decent amount of ownership. He costs so much at 9.5 compared to how he's been priced over the past year or so. But all the top finishes in a row, even though none of them better than 5th, it's still going to get some eyeballs on him. And last week he was racing really well until he ran into trouble there at the end. So I kind of came into this week wanting to play Blaney. I just wish he was more confident. If these guys express confidence and find speed in practice, I'm all over them. I'm just kind of holding out for that, Right now it's just a concern, little pattern. So here at $10,100, Martin Truex Jr., rating out to be the best play on the board on DraftKings. Over on FanDuel, he's $13,500, a lot more that you have to pay for him there. But starting back in 23rd with a great history here, the win back in 2017, runner-up in 2015, and 3rd and 4th here last year. Truex is just the man at 1.5 mile tracks. His amazing 2017 season, we saw him win, I think it was 5 or 6 races at 1.5 mile tracks, and he always finishes right up there among the top. 91% of the time he's finished in the top 10. Just some really incredible numbers from Mr. Truex. He is just the man at 1.5 mile tracks. Things could be a little bit different with just with how things are working out with his package and all that. Showed middling speeds in practice so far, but that'll make itself known in time. Just right on the edge of qualifying, and I'm not going to knock guys really for qualifying lower this week. It was frantic. It was crazy. You had guys like Kurt Busch qualifying in the back, and that never happens. So just a weird week. I think Truex will easily rebound. And he's going to be chalky, but he's not just good chalk. He is great chalk. Like cash games, he is a lock button for sure. Could be the highest owned play on the slate. I think it's close between him, Kurt Busch, and Ryan Newman. But I think he should be the highest owned on the slate. Kevin Harvick could also be that guy as well. He just costs so much. On FanDuel, he'll definitely be the highest owned. Either him or maybe Kyle Busch, if Kyle Busch shows speed. But, you know, I don't know. He's actually a little expensive on FanDuel. He might not come in as the highest owned. I think that will be Kyle Busch or something like that. But still, just some great chalk to be playing. Great for cash games if you're playing it safe. Go all in on Truex. If you're a crazy person who loves the thrill, you might be an interesting fade candidate. But you know, I've tried fading Truex at 1.5 mile tracks before, and it's not fun. It's not good. 74% of the time he finishes in the top 5. That's better than Kevin Harvick. That's better than anybody. The dude is just amazing at these tracks, and this is one he's had even more success at than usual. 36 lead laps on average here. Just, you know, the dominating performance in 2017. Absolutely capable of again, and still a good price on DraftKings. Deserves to be the highest owned and just best play overall over there, but with the added variance, who knows? Moving down the list here, Kyle Larson, a guy that really impressed last week. Showed a lot of chops, and his Xfinity car last year just absolutely crushed everybody at 1.5 mile tracks, no matter who was driving it. That team had a lot going on there, of course. It was illegal, so the feds shut him down, but we still see that acumen come into play at the 1.5 mile tracks. You know, over the last year, his driver rating is very similar to Martin Truex Jr., and he's actually led more laps and has had more fast laps than Martin Truex Jr. At the last 3 races at this track, he's finished 2nd, 3rd, and 2nd, so he's been knocking on the door right there. And I think he's one of the drivers that benefits the most from the changes in this package. You know, if more guys are going to be driving on the outside, that's Larson's specialty. That's just something he's amazing at. And, you know, slower the speeds. I think that also, I think just lowering the speeds and horsepower overall is something that's going to work into Kyle Larson's favor a little bit. So I'm definitely on Kyle Larson. You know, last week I was just about getting a sprinkle of him as like an alternate dominator. But he really kept popping up, rated out really well in the stats. The domination station ended up being one of the best drivers, just up there. You know, you really needed him with his lead laps and all that, and he tried to take himself out at the end there, but still ended up being a great play. I think a lot of people are going to remember that from last week, so people they'll still be playing him. He's not going to be low owned. I don't think he's going to be low owned at all, especially with the 2nd, 3rd, 2nd form at this track. But definitely someone, you know, one of the few dominators you're going to want to focus on. The 4 main dominators here at this track are Harvick and Busch. They're on a tier all on their own. It's pretty much those two, mano y mano. But you've got Hamlin starting 2nd, and he could do something. And you've got Larson starting there in 7th, and I expect him to move up early and then be a factor all race. So Larson, someone I'm in on, definitely on FanDuel over there, and on DraftKings I think he has some dominator upside, and yeah, I think he also gets a lot of fast laps too, which should help his case there, and his price is all right at 9.8. Going down to Chase Elliott at $9,200. That is my guy there. Hendrick has been all about drafting so far. Put up some fast speeds in practice. Him and Byron are 4th and 5th on the board. Him coming in 4th there, but just in qualifying trim and all that. It's something they're going to be continuing. You know, we saw them do that with qualifying. Ended up qualifying 12th, which is okay. Like I had mentioned earlier, he has the 3 DNFs here, but he also has the 3rd place finish. And the one race he did get to attempt in 2017, with 116 driver rating, average running position of 4th. I mean, he was right there. 11 fast laps in all. The last few seasons, he started really hot with a bunch of top 10s and stuff and kind of fizzled towards the end. Last year was better for him with, him having a few wins and all that, really taking a step up as a driver. Last few weeks, and really the second half of last season, we saw Elliott sort of just not factor in races as much. And it's still kind of something I'm worried about with him. I think his ownership would be lower. He hasn't really done a whole lot lately, but he has shown the flash of upside here. And he's someone I'm going to have my eyes on. Of course, he's my favorite driver. I'll definitely try to end up with some of him. He's just really hard to play. I like some of the guys cheaper than him. We'll get to some really awesome plays down here. I don't really think his Dominator upside is quite there. I don't see him being able to work his way around the Harvicks and Busches of the world, but he could possibly do it, and he could possibly do a top 5 finish again here. And if it's at low ownership, he's one of the guys that might be one of those plays. So someone I got my eye on, but I'd really need to see a bit more from him in practice tomorrow. Clint Boyer starting 17th, and I think despite him starting 17th, which is generally a good spot for him, I don't think his ownership will be too out of control. He has really bad track history here. 10th in 2017 with his first race here with Stewart-Haas Racing, but just 18th and 23rd since then. Not doing much in the way of dominating at 1.5 mile tracks, just average 1.5 lead laps over the last year at these tracks, 4.6 fast laps. Historically it was in worse equipment, but again, more of the same. Just this is his worst track type for sure. I definitely tend to target him more on the shorter tracks, just the different kind of tracks, even plate races and stuff like that. But starting 17th, he still has some space to move up, and he was 9th overall in practice speeds in the first practice, but he was 3rd in 5-lap averages for what it's worth. Something to keep your eyes on there. He was fast last week, but his fast speeds didn't really end up with him doing a whole lot. The practice times were a bit more misleading than usual last week at Atlanta, and it's really more about how you work in traffic and on the long runs and stuff, and that's something we're gonna have to wait till tomorrow to see, because nobody really took long runs. Denny Hamlin, gonna be incredibly low owned. I think his price might be decent enough for him to gain a little ownership on DraftKings, just as like an alternate dominator. He is like the alternate dominator here. He was fast in practice and all that so far, but, hasn't really done too much recently at this track. At 1.5 miles, again, he's sort of like Boyer, and that being one of his more worst types of tracks. Only one win here in the last 2 years, or at 1.5 mile tracks. And this one, hasn't been too great to him. It's just kind of been, just a guy that finishes maybe in the top 10, top 15, and doesn't really score a lot of fantasy points. But you are going to want to play him. It's harder to make the JGR stacked with Kyle Busch being right there, but I could see him and Kyle Busch working together early on. And, it's kind of awkward with him starting in the second row and Kyle Busch starting in the inside in the second row behind Harvick. But I could still see a way where Hamlin blocks off Harvick and Kyle Busch and leads that way, or just with the if there are going to be constant lead changes, he's definitely a guy in position to potentially grab some. So he's an alternate dominator, and I have more interest in him this week than I usually would. I think he goes overlooked. I think if he dominates a decent portion of this race and just has a solid finish like he's capable of, maybe not a top 10, but a top 5, with some sort of dominator, points, it'd be kind of unprecedented with him still, but it's still possible. I just want to have shares of him just in case of that. Not too sold on his upside here, but just a guy I'm going to want to have some insurance shares of, and someone I'm looking at just in case he really does end up being low owned, because that is interesting to me with the addition of variance to the race. The more variance, the more I want to target the lower owned guys that have a somewhat similar range of outcomes than other guys near them that are very chalky. So going down to the 8K range here, the mid to low 8K range, where you get a lot of value just immediately. You get Eric Almirola, $8,600, got bumped right at the end of round 1 and will start off 25th, did not make the round of 24, and that's pretty awesome. He's got his teammate there too at Kurt Busch at $8,200, starting 28th. He did even worse than Almirola. So Almirola has been pretty good since switching over to Stewart-Haas, finished 10th and then 6th here last year. Finished 14th in 2017 as well. So, very good driver here generally, just considering the equipment he's been in. And, another top 10 is definitely likely here. We've seen him, really factor in. He was fast last week, had the pole, obviously. Drastic change since then, but the price is still quite nice. And Almirola starting in the back usually is pretty darn safe. He's always been kind of cash money when starting in the back. Really awesome cash gameplay, of course. I think he's going to go lower owned than Kurt Busch. I mean, Kurt Busch is just really, really cheap for Kurt Busch, and he's coming off some really good finishes. And him starting back there in 28th is just amazing. He is definitely moving up. He's another example of really great chalk. I mean, it's hard to find a way to fade the chalk this week because the chalk just looks so good. And then sandwiched between these two teammates, you've got Eric Jones in the JGR number 20 Toyota, and he crashed in this race last year in the fall race with along with a bunch of guys, like Kevin Harvick and Chase Elliott and Denny Hamlin. But that's kind of we're gonna let that race slide and just focus on his two other races here. Finished 8th last year in the spring race and 15th in 2017. He has shown chops at 1.5 mile tracks in particular. I've kind of noticed that with him, sort of on the borderline edge of like leading laps and stuff, but averages 10 fast laps. That's better than guys like Hamlin, Boyer, Almirola, Chase Elliott, right there with Ryan Blaney. He has potential to be pretty similar in value to Ryan Blaney this week for over $1,000 cheaper. Did not end up bad last week despite finding some trouble. And like I had said, just not bad the 1.5 mile tracks, and he's starting back in 18th. Has some space to move up, and I think his ownership will be lower than it ought to be starting this low, being sandwiched right in between Eric Almirola and Kurt Busch, who I knew this would finally happen. Again, I just overlooked when I mentioned him earlier. And I'll start officially talking about Kurt Busch to kind of make up for myself, but he's not Eric Almirola's teammate anymore. Got to get used to that. He is in the number 1 Chevy for CGR, Chip Ganassi Racing. Larson's teammate, taking over Jamie McMurray's ride from last year. Of course, it hasn't really made much of a difference to him in his finishes. He's had some really solid finishes. Had a really good race last week. He has struggled here significantly. Most tracks we see him put up top 10s, top 15s all the time. He has finished outside of the top 20 in all but one race here in his last 6 tries. 9th back in 2016 is the best that he's done. But starting back in 28th, it doesn't really matter now, does it? At $8,200, that is so cheap for Kurt, who has been in the upper 8Ks usually. I think he got quite the price drop this week, and just represents some pretty obvious value. He does have fade merit, with the history here. Of course, a lot of that was like DNF and crash related, so it's not really, again, I kind of like overlooking that sort of stuff, but it's not going to matter too much. He's still going to be super chalky just with where he's starting because he's obviously moving up. If you're fading him, if you're playing him, it's for that obvious place differential upside. You're not being sneaky at all. He's still going to have a lot of ownership. Been slow in the practices so far, but he's at his hometown. I don't know why he's performed so poorly at his hometown. Maybe it's there's distractions or whatever, but I'm still very likely to overlook that and just play a really cheap Kurt Busch, $8,200 on DraftKings, and maybe fade him more over there on FanDuel where his price is significantly higher. And he with the trouble in his history here, maybe it's best to keep away from him over there on FanDuel. But yeah, that's my take with him. If you've got a cheaper Jimmy Johnson at $8,100 this week, but starting ninth, not really interested in that whatsoever. Was really poor at 1.5 mile tracks last year. Just a 72 driver rating. You couldn't distinguish his stats from like Ricky Stenhouse's. The only lead laps he had were strategy where he didn't pit. Pretty much. Not really too much upside to be had with Jimmy Johnson. He could be a decent part of a Hendrick stack. I know I like Byron, who I'm going to mention soon. And Chase Elliott was fast, at least so far, and has a little bit of history here. And those guys could work together. I know CGR, they'll work with Hendrick as well. And we've seen some other Chevys, RCR, look really fast. So, I wouldn't fade him completely, but still, I'm not making Jimmy Johnson a play that I'm trying to get on. And he could be very low owned as well. I think people are finally tired of his crap. Up next, we've got Ricky Stenhouse Jr. at $7,900. He's starting 8th. He has really bad history at this track as well. He's been quite the Ricky Stenhouse here. He did finish 12th in 2016 and 14th in the spring race here last year. That's about as good as he's done. He's finished outside the top 25 in the other 4 races out of his last 6. Just a lot of unfortunate trouble for him. But he's actually focused more on wrecking other people, and honestly, this year he hasn't been wrecking much at all. He's actually looked pretty good. Looked better than I expected him to last week, that's for sure. Just keeps kind of impressing me a little bit. Still not going to play him much. I will play him over on FanDuel, where I suspect he's going to be low owned, and his starting position will probably help him over there, is where it probably harms him over on DraftKings, but I think his ownership will be very low on both sites. Still just, not really looking to play Stenhouse at a 1.5 mile track. There's not too much precedent for him doing anything really worthwhile here. It's not like he's super cheap either on either site. But again, I'd look to him more on FanDuel. Rouse hasn't shown a whole lot. His teammate Newman looked pretty bad out there in qualifying. So he's one of my bigger fades. He just tends to do that a lot, just over qualify and then go backwards. That's how Stenhouse has been lately. You've got Daniel Suarez at $7,700 starting in 22nd. That is pretty darn good for him. He's going to be just a really easy part of the Stewart-Haas stack here. Play him with Almirola starting back in 25th, Boyer starting back in 2017th, and if you can somehow afford it, get some Harvick in there on the pole. And you've got your dominators, got your place differential all set. Just throw Scrubs in there to finish, and that's a solid lineup. And how many times last year did we see Stewart-Haas just win races and run around with all 4 of their guys up in the front like 7, or even in the front 4? And, if we see a lot of drafting, which they haven't done too much of, but we could see tomorrow in practice potentially. If you see things like Stewart-Haas guys drafting, working together with Penske, we're going to be reminded quickly why they're such a favorite to win, these Fords are. And it's just a really cheap price for Daniel Suarez at $7,700, considering he's in Stewart-Haas Racing equipment and starting back in 22nd. That's going to be great. And I don't think his ownership is going to be all that crazy on either site. I kind of like him on FanDuel as a sneaky play over there. I think he really goes overlooked on that site specifically. But even on DraftKings, I don't think his ownership is going to be past 25%, 30%. Because I think that guys like Ryan Newman, guys like Kurt Busch, Almirola are just glaring, just very much glaring at you from the lineup screen. A lot of people are going to be jamming them into some really chalky lineups. That is something I do see this week. I see some really easy lineups to be made with just the chalkiest of the chalky guys out there, especially with some of the 6,000 guys opening up a little bit of salary as well. And we'll get to those guys here. But Suarez is somebody I think can be a little contrarian of that. And he's in better equipment than he finished 8th in here last year. So, starting 22nd, that is a good upside play for me. And he's safe enough, even though he's struggled at the 1.5s so far early in his career. I think he could just be a really good little ownership play there with a solid floor. Now we get to Austin Dillon, who what to make of this guy right now? So him and his teammate Hemrick were drafting in practice, and they were the fastest. They put up the fastest laps. We saw Hemrick especially. He's done this in the first 2 weeks, really. Just put up crazy fast practice times. In the race, last week he was so impressive, Hemrick was. We'll get to Hemrick here, but Dillon, last week it was a track where it wasn't really for him, and he just wasn't really a factor much of the race. Now here, this is a decent track for him. He finished 5th in 2016, 13th and 11th last year, but it's really been about what he did in the practice session. He won that. RCR flashed incredible speed with him and Hemrick. And that'll probably also apply to the other two RCR affiliated cars and Bubba Wallace and Ty Dillon down low. And we saw Bubba Wallace qualify a little bit better than he usually does, and then Ty Dillon had an incredible qualifying. He's starting 14th, which is way higher than he usually does. But these guys, RCR, they do not have like a track record of very good success here. Outside of, Newman, when he was driving for RCR, he put 6 top 17 finishes together. And that was pretty good. The 3rd in 2015, really nice. 9th and 11th last year. But obviously that isn't like, domination type speed, right? I mean, Newman snuck in more fast laps than the usual guy around his skill level would, but that's something we've never seen Dillon do at 1.5 mile tracks. You usually want to play him at different sort of track types. He's a guy that won't put up any dominator points and will sneak into like the top 15 at the end of the race after you forgot he exists. But here his speed is glaring. He was the fastest in the practice, and again he crushed that practice that they had out there at Vegas, and we've seen his name in a lot of other drivers' mouths. In all the interviews, they all kind of name dropped Dillon and said how fast RCR was this week, and that's something I'm paying close attention to. In the practices tomorrow, that'll really show what their long speeds and stuff are all about, and how they plan on drafting, who they plan on drafting with, and all that. Got to figure that they will find some help with the Hendrick and Chip Ganassi guys, but again, just a lot of unknowns here. Dillon starting in 4th. That's the thing. This is one of the best tracks you could possibly be a punt and start 4th at and do okay, but for most part, this would usually just be a pretty easy fade, since he doesn't really have dominator upside in a usual race. But here, who knows? Like, him and Hemrick could just start working together off the bat and just steal the lead. I mean, that is in play here, and that is something I would never even consider before, but the speed seems real with them. It's going to, again, it's going to be put to a litmus test in these 2 post-qualifying practices, but Dillon's just someone I've really got my eye on there, and, he's just been a name in other people's mouths. He's priced up among the guys, Eric Jones, Kurt Busch, Jimmy Johnson in Vegas. They're growing a little akin to him, and it'll be interesting to see how much his line moves with him starting up in the front, or the second to the front row there. So, RCR is probably the most interesting team this week. And let's talk about Hemrick real quick. He's starting in 5th. Now, last week he looked amazing. He was in the top 10 all race. As far as he just worked his way up to the top 10, which nobody expected. And he had started back in 28th or something. He was an amazing player. We were all over him, and he just ran into some straight up bad variants. He got a bad tire, and his tire went out, and that was all she wrote. So it's like a brain aneurysm. It can strike at any time, and it doesn't have to be your fault at all. That's why NASCAR is it can be a bear sometimes, because these races can be very predictable. It's impossible to predict the unpredictable, the variance that just strikes here. So as long as that doesn't happen to Hemrick again, I was going to be all over him. Him and Priest, the 2 rookies, they look so good. It's just, they both just got taken out earlier than they ought to have. Of course, Priest was on his own volition there, but Hamrick just got screwed. I was really looking forward to playing him this week, but starting 5th, that is a tall order, and he's gotten priced up to $7,100 now on DraftKings. He's looking like a FanDuel only play. He is cheap over there, $7,000. You know, the cheap is kind of relative there. More interested in Dillon, $7,400 over there on FanDuel. I think he's a great FanDuel play, but that is where I'd play Hamrick. I don't think he's leading laps here, and you would need to get some sort of value out of that on DraftKings, unless he has like a top 5 finish somehow. But I don't really see that in the cards for him. You know, like I wouldn't play Dillon and Hamrick together in a lineup. I feel like that would just be a waste of a lineup, even though it's like a team stack there. You know, he's someone I would just have marginal shares of just in case. But Dillon would be the one I would take some sort of stab on if the speed is there, just because I think he would be the one leading it. Paul Menard at $6,900, another guy with some sneaky form, similar to Newman. Very similar to Newman with his form, 10th and 9th last year, and just generally finishes top 15, 3rd back in 2014. So, I mean, very similar to Newman's form. You know, with the switch to the Wood Brothers racing last year, you know, that did help with his 1.5 mile performance. It's improved a lot, but still around the likes of guys like Bowman and Newman, you know, Jimmy Johnson, a little better than guys like Jimmy Johnson, Stenhouse, Suarez. But I think he's going to go overlooked on FanDuel, and I think that might be a bit of a mistake. He does have the history of some decent finishes here, and he's got a lot of help around him from some fast Fords. Like he's 90 to 1 on the book, so he has a worse like odds to win than like freaking Hamrick at 70 to 1. So, you know, a little sketch there, but still. Menard, I think, especially over there on FanDuel, he's going to be a low-owned play that could be overlooked. It might be the potential to winning it all. You know, I'm really trying to find plays like that I think are going to have low ownership, and I'll find myself on more Menard than I would expect to coming in, just with how ownership is kind of looking. Now, another guy, he'd be DraftKings only here at $6,700. Matt Dibenedetto, the hero of Daytona. Last week he was in the hand-me-down from Hamlin. He was driving the car that he raced in Atlanta last year and didn't do quite as well. Didn't have the greatest of races. Just I think that's about what we can expect from Dibenedetto. Just moving forward, he had always kind of outperformed his equipment at this race in particular, finishing in the 20s usually. And usually probably starting back in like the 30s or so, but the 46, 47 driver rating, 1.5 mile tracks just kind of paints a picture of how, how scrubby he is in general. But he has moved up. He's in Casey Kane's car from last year. Of course, it's not his Hendrick car, his number 5 car that he had all his success here and even dominated in the past with at this track, but still. You can look to some of Michael McDowell's older numbers to get kind of a sense of what this 95 car does here. It's a lot better now, I will say, than when McDowell drove it. That is for sure. It's got more of a direct alliance with JGR. It's a Toyota there. So Levine Family Racing's got the direct sort of alliance with JGR. It's not as strong as like some other alliances out there, but still he's getting some somewhat quality parts. And I might play him with like a Toyota stack. If you go Kyle Busch as your Dominator, then go like Truex and Eric Jones and then Dibenedetto, that could work out great. He's starting in 26th. He has the upside. It's just I don't think it's as good as it may seem. I think Daytona really kind of overrated him in a lot of people's eyes, because I mean that's Daytona. It's hard to apply that directly, and he doesn't have much precedent for doing all that well here, but we know he's in better equipment than before. That can't be overstated there. And so just another guy you'll want to have some exposure to, but you'll want to keep it real with him. William Byron at $6,600. He is so cheap like every week, and he finally qualified at least in the middle of the pack, right there at 20th. Just slightly in the back half of the field, and that'll do for him. That'll do. Showed fast times in practice so far. Looking to be one of the Chevys that can use the new package to improve. He was one of the many that crashed early on last year in the fall race, and he was 27th in the spring race, so he's done like nothing here at all. He did steal I think 2 fast laps in that race from the spring. Other than that, he's probably going to finish around where he starts unless, the Chevys really find something there. I mean, I could see him sneaking into the top 15, top 10. He has a knack for doing that. And the speeds, at least so far, we've seen him put up some decent speeds. He's a good play on FanDuel. On DraftKings, he's a fine play, but probably right there in the Dibenedetto sort of range, Paul Menard sort of range. Not like a great play, like some of the more obvious ones here, like Ryan Newman, obviously, super obvious. And next guy I'll talk about, Buescher. Again, the guy that did great for everyone last week and will probably be a very popular play. But Byron, I mean, his Vegas odds are the same as Dibenedetto's, and it's coming in right behind like Menard and right there with Ryan Newman. So that's about what you can expect from him. Maybe a little bit more upside. It all just again, like I'm saying with a lot of these guys, it depends on practice. The final 2 practices is so important, guys. Running through the bottom part of this field right here. I mean, this is pretty much the last good play right here. Is Chris Buescher with JTG Doherty Racing. We saw his teammate Ryan Preece look excellent last week, and he looked excellent. He found track position and was able to stay on the lead lap, and he was like pretty darn chalky, over 30% owned, but he absolutely crushed it, was in the optimal. You needed him. And over the last year at 1.5 mile tracks, he's finished 99% of his scheduled laps. He's finished on the lead lap, however, only 24% of the time. That'll kind of paint the story with Buescher. Unfortunately, we're getting into that range where the odds start dropping, like Buescher's 300 to 1, and these guys are going to go a lap or 2 down. It's just going to happen. Unless he has a repeat great performance of last week where he was able to capitalize on things like strategy, it's probably not going to happen for him. It won't be as bad as before, it really won't, but he'll still probably eventually somewhere throughout the race find himself a lap down. But, he's still going to be a popular target, and he's a good target. I mean, he's right in the range. The same goes with Dibenedetto, where the range where you get the lucky dog. Just getting a lucky dog is so helpful for drivers, and Buescher is right there in that guy, like right on the fringe of guys who will stay on the lead lap. I mean, he's starting a little bit far back, but I think he'll be perfectly fine. Average over the last year, average 21st. His average running position at 1.5 mile tracks is 21st, the 19th in average finish. And I think Buescher, he's someone that I think is improving a lot and will just continue to improve. This was the Xfinity champion a few years ago, and he's finished 15th here in both of his finishes last year. A lot of it through survival, but the spring race was legitimately pretty good, and he's shown some pretty decent chops at 1.5 mile tracks, especially compared to the guys he's in the price range with. He's pretty similar to like a Byron, more than he would be, like a Bubba Wallace or Dillon or David Ragan, McDowell, those kind of guys. So definitely a solid play, some more good chalk. Unfortunately, this week all the chalk is really good chalk. Not sure who I'd start fading there, but Buescher, I love him on FanDuel as well. He always goes kind of under-owned there. And on DraftKings, he's kind of chalk. I could see a reason to fade him, but he's probably going to move up a little bit. Probably just how it's going to be. And you've got Bubba Wallace at $6,300. He's the first of these two sort of charter teams that have the connection with RCR that might get a bit of a bump. But we've seen his practice times. I mean, he had the 8th fastest lap, and he was 8th fastest in the 5 lap averages we could gather so far. He's had bad luck here in the past, crashed in the fall race. 21st in the spring race is all right. About what we can expect of him. We'll probably finish around where he starts at 21st. Wish he was starting a few spots back farther, like last week. But, just a player going to have some shares of. Kind of interested with the direct RCR alliance there, and we'll see if he keeps his speeds up as practice goes through. Now $6,100, and a little more interestingly, $5,000 on FanDuel. You've got Ryan Preece. Now he's a rookie, like I had pointed out. Rookies are great on FanDuel. Like, they'll go very low owned, but they're also terrible for FanDuel. They're like the worst thing you can do on FanDuel, because rookies, their first few races, when they're adjusting to the cup rules and stuff, especially in pit road, I've mentioned this to you guys so many times before, especially in pit road. I'm pretty sure I said it on the pod last week. Hemrick, Preece, these guys, they're great plays. They're going to be awesome drivers in the Cup Series. It's just the first few races, there's a lot of adjusting you have to do. Getting used to the timing lines is a huge thing. You'll see pit penalties come on these guys just en masse. And we saw it with Bubba Wallace when he was taking over for Almirola last year. And you see it with pretty much every new driver in their first few races. And voila, last week, Preece was driving out of his mind after an incredible Daytona run that was just mind-blowing the way he avoided the big ones there. Was riding in the top 10 constantly. Like, he legitimately put himself up there in the top 10. Something you'd pretty much never catch Almirola doing, or not Almirola, but Allmendinger doing in this car last year. And again, it's also important to remember that Allmendinger was a guy who did really well in the the All-Star race and stuff last week. That whole week he did. I think he won one of the qualifiers to get into the All-Star race in kind of dominating fashion. So, I mean, this is a guy I've circled like crazy this week. He's starting back in 24th. Might go lower owned. I mean, he looks really bad on the game logs right now, and it's just because... Oh, sorry, I was leading up to this earlier and I didn't say it. I apologize. I'll finish my thought that I was leading up to. But yes, these rookies, they find trouble in the pits early. And once again, it happened last week. He was looking down at his tachometer and ran into BJ McLeod, who, I will admit, he was, pitting from far out on the right side of the pit lane. But let me tell you, if he wasn't looking down his tack, he would have avoided that wreck pretty easily. But hey, rookies are going to be rookies, right? That's what happens here. So I think the ultimate point was that, I'd love to play him over on FanDuel, but, rookies are just really risky with that sort of stuff. But I couldn't really be too much more impressed by Preece early on with his first two races. And I love how his he ended up getting the poor finish last week. I want to slam him on DraftKings. The practice time seems all right so far. Seems to be on pace. And, there's no real... this is only like his fourth race at a 1.5 mile track in the Cup Series. Second with this car, so there are going to be some more learning curves to get over still, but I think he has a lot of upside. I really like the play this week. I think he's going to go low owned as well, which is something I'm trying to attack pretty aggressively. So, love me some Ryan Preece. Next, you've got Ty Dillon at $6,000, starting in 14th. Again, more of a FanDuel play. He's really good at staying on the lead lap and stuff like that. That's pretty much my call on Dillon. I don't see a reason for playing him on DraftKings, but on FanDuel, I think he does make for a solid play. Same with David Ragan, starting 6th. Now, this is like FanDuel only. Now, he's the first of 3 front row drivers we'll be talking about here in a row. And they've got the connection straight up with Roush, who aren't looking exactly the greatest so far this week. So we'll have to see with these guys, but we'll talk about all 3 of them in a row here. You got David Ragan starting 6th, Michael McDowell starting 16th, which is actually one of the lowest spots. Lower than last week at least, where he started like 12th, and still ended up with a somewhat decent finish. He's starting 16th, which is still kind of a fade, will warrant a bit of a fade for him. But Ragan starting 6th is insane. He hasn't finished better than 22nd here in recent history, even though his equipment is better now. Can't really play a guy at starting 6th. I would just have to play him on FanDuel. Even then, he's going to go backwards enough spot to probably hurt him a little bit. But they've also got Matt Tifft starting back in 35th. Now that is interesting. He is slower than his teammates so far, and wasn't terribly impressive last week, to be quite honest. He was slow early on, just not on the same level as his teammates in the 36 car, but starting back in 35th, he might be a guy that you play for Carnage. He's going to be one of the key guys you play in the back for Carnage. Starting 35th, a lot of room for him to move up. He's starting behind guys like Kligerman, Castle, LaJoie, McLeod, Cody Ware, so he definitely has guys that he's better than, that he can move ahead, at least 5 right there. So even if he goes laps down, all he has to do is pass DNF guys, and enough of those drivers in worse cars starting ahead of him that I think he can make some value there. And he's $5,600. He'll really help you get Kevin Harvick, although a little bit of merit to playing him with and other guys this cheap, with not with the most expensive guys, and with more of your balanced sort of lineups, because most of the time these guys at the bottom are just going to be paired with the guys at the top. It's nice to mix it up a little bit and maybe take angles that other people aren't going to be taking, especially with how chalky this week is kind of lining up to be. So Matt Tiff, just a decent GPP only play, DraftKings only play, just for the place differential. Wouldn't touch him on FanDuel, even at the super cheap price. And then you've got Ross Chastain, who screwed everyone last week by just being slow. He had raced he's been doing all these triples, and he's doing it again this week, racing all 3 series. And he's looked incredible in all the other series, but then last week at Atlanta, he just looked flat out terrible. In the speeds, he was down there among the bottom guys, not the very worst, but that second tier of worst guys. Guys like Castle and LaJoie were faster than him. He was down there with like McLeod and stuff, with average lap times and speeds and all. So Chastain, a lot of worries for him. Just his car is not great. We saw him do a lot of surviving last year, especially at this track. He finished 20th in that infamous fall race there, and then 29th in this race last year. And at 29th, will probably do it for a guy starting in 38th. I will say that, but expect him to once again fall several laps down, and it'll kind of limit his upside. And unless like Harvick wins and like you really need like Keselowski becomes second or Truex becomes second or something, and you need the salary up there, he's probably not going to be that vital of a play. And especially on FanDuel, a lot of risk associated with him. But if you're going to punt way down and use anyone on FanDuel, he's what $3,500. That's not the worst play you can make. Finishes a lot more laps and stuff than a lot of the guys around him. I'd probably lean to Castle, actually, but we'll get to him next, actually. No, first we got to talk about Parker Kligerman here, starting 32nd. I was fine in the Truck Series last week. In Cup, a little bit faster than I expected from him. I kind of expect him to be really towards the back, with the real slow guys. At least so far in the first practice, he seems up to speed somewhat, but he's still going laps back. And starting 32nd, this is a guy I'd be interested if he was starting like 35th or worse or something. But, this week I still want to avoid these guys that are just actual scrubs in the back. I still, even with the change in package at all, I don't think it's going to be helping these guys as much unless they just survive. It's kind of where you're playing them. So, if you're going for the survival guys, it just makes more sense to go Chastain than Kligerman here, although I think the field will kind of do the same thing. So Kligerman, it'd be like DraftKings GPP only. You got Castle, another guy who survived here last year, finished 18th. In 2017, he finished 27th. In 2016, he finished 28th. Of course, I was in a different ride. But he did put this number 0 Starcom Chevy in 18th last year just by surviving. And it's the Jeffrey Earnhardt machine. Sakari kind of took over from last year after McDowell took over his number 34 car that he was sporting. Still, even with the finishes and all, it might lead people to playing him. But starting 31st, I don't see reason to play him on either site. Maybe FanDuel, FanDuel, I'd probably be where I play him because he's 3,500, but it's literally just survival only for him. And I think if it comes down to that, there might be some other guys that just have a little bit more upside. And Corey LaJoie is pretty much the same sort of play here. His equipment is better, so I'm a little more interested in him, but he's starting 30th. That is kind of stretching it. For guys in the back, he's still going laps down and all, just in the Matt Dibenedetto car from last year that, he would usually put in the lower 20s. Just not really feeling the upside too much there. Again, maybe on FanDuel. He's 3K even on FanDuel. It does rate out as like our best value down there, but, unless you're stacking like Kevin Harvick and Truex together or like Kyle Busch together, you won't really need to go that low. And there are just better plays you can make in like the 5 or 6K range over there. So these are just like complete reaches down here. If you're playing a ton of lineups, I might get into these guys, but for the most part, I'd try to avoid these like real scrubs. You got Gaze at 5,000, starting 36th. No thank you on him. He's the slowest car by far. Seriously, you don't want to play Gaze. Reed Sorensen, he's like, again, survival only. Definitely DraftKings only there, starting at 37th. He's finished 31st here the last 2 years. But still, he's going to be one of the cars crashing most likely. Just no real upside with him. Even if he survives, he's not going to like pass even like the guys like LaJoie and Castle and Kligerman, all that. Like, he's on a different level of bad, and he's almost 2 seconds off the pace. BJ McLeod, he's a second and a half off the pace. Not really feeling him at all. I don't think his car is good either. And the same goes for Cody Ware. Down there at min price, $4,700. His teammate, again, just one of the slowest cars week to week, and he has yet to even finish a 1.5 mile track in his career. So just avoid. I would play, honestly, I'd play Sorensen or McLeod if I really, really needed to from way down here, but it would have to be like the quarter arcade or something, like, at best. So, I mean, that is not a plan that I plan on using. Maybe if it was, I don't know. Nah, I mean, there's pretty much no one that could convince me to take a car that's like almost 2 seconds off the pace. So really avoid these guys. The guys I'd look to punt to down low would be, Tift really sticks out there. Chastain on DraftKings, definitely DraftKings only for those guys. And then that 6K range where there's, several different plays you can make. You're just going to want to play it safe this week and kind of wait things out. I wouldn't take aggressive stands this week, certainly. I would try to spread it out a little bit because we're still sort of in a wait and see mode. I would probably lower my entries a little bit, unless you're just a fan of chaos and gambling and all that. But, the plan this week is just to really just watch it unfold, see what happens. This week is going to be telling for a lot of the future 1.5 mile tracks we'll come up to with the Aero Ducks in. And yeah, we just have to see how this does in comparison to how Las Vegas is usually raced. So we're going a little bit long here, about an hour and a half. I'm going to call it quits here on this pod. Gone through this thing pretty slow. Might as well call it Taco's Slow 40. But again, thanks for listening, you guys. Remember, DFSArmy.com is where you can find me. And at DFS, or at Taco DFS, to find me on Twitter. I post a lot of stats and graphics over there. And use promo code TACO on DFSArmy.com to get that lifetime 20% off discount and support the pod. Get access to all of the cool metrics you've heard on the podcast here. And we'll be looking forward to the 2019 NASCAR season. Make it even better than last year, if that's even possible. So, I'll see you guys next week at, I do believe it's either Phoenix or Fontana, one of those two. Can't remember off the top of my head, but see ya.
Thank you for listening to the DFS Army podcast. Join the DFS Army today and gain access to our private Slack chat, where you can chat with real DFS pros and coaches, as well as other DFS Army members with winning track records. Also included in your membership is access to our premium articles, DFS Army weighted projections for every sport we offer, from NFL to MMA, weekly daily player picks and cheat sheets, the strategy vault of timeless concepts, and the DFS Army Domination Station, a truly state-of-the-art lineup optimizer, offering your personal projections or ours. The DFS Army membership is the best value across the industry. Join today and get 2 free ebooks, as well as the secrets to unlocking a new level to your game.
Hey guys, are you looking for a sportsbook that you can trust? Well, look no further than mybookie.ag, where you can get a 50% match on your initial deposit of up to $1,000 when you use promo code DFSArmy. As a bonus, when you use promo code DFSArmy, you also get a free month of DFS Army VIP and DFS Army Beat the Bookie membership. That's a $100 combined value. So we'll help you with your daily fantasy sports, and we'll help you with your handicapping. Free when you sign up for mybookie.ag using promo code DFSArmy.